We have Jeanette Leardi. I probably mispronounced her last name, even though I practiced it. She's the author of the book Aging Sideways, and I am super excited to have Jeanette with us today. Let me welcome her to the stage. And Jeanette, did, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Leardi, yeah, yeah,
Leardi. Oh, holy cow. Um,
yeah.
anyways, um, well, Jeanette, thanks so much for joining us. Really excited to dive into your book and the topic of ageism. It's for me, it's one of the most thought-provoking discussions that we have is discussing ageism. But before we do that, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background and how did you uh, become one of the what I think is one of the nation's thought leaders on the topic of ageism.
Oh, well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to have this conversation. Um, I am a social gerontologist, which means I study how society views aging and also how society supports or doesn't do such a great job supporting aging, all the different factors that affects. But I've been a writer and editor all my life and a teacher. I have a master's in English from Rutgers, but when I was in my late 40s, mid 40s to mid 50s, I'd say, I became the sole caregiver for both my parents, both simultaneously and sequentially for 10 years. That's a whole decade of incredible experiences. It was a very stressful time for all of us because I tried to get them what we gerontologists call person-centered care, which is care that is directed to them as individuals, taking into account who they are and what they wanted and what they needed. And it was such a struggle to get them that. I was just appalled at how older people were viewed, how they could be neglected, how they could be misinterpreted and judged, infantilized, marginalized. So after they both passed away, I went back to graduate school because I wanted to learn what aging is all about and why do we get it so wrong. So I got a graduate certificate in gerontology from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and I've been writing and teaching about aging issues ever since.
Wow. All right. Well, um, we're gonna dive into your book. And when did you publish? It's a recent title, correct?
Yeah, yeah, it was published in September, and it's a compendium. Actually, I've been blogging about aging issues for about 10 years. So it's a compendium of my blog posts plus other original essays. I just figured it was time for me I wanted to spread my ideas to a wider audience as opposed to just giving individual presentations here and there. And fortunately, I've gotten a lot of great reception for the
I
book.
love it. All right. Well, before we open the book and dive into it, I love the title, Aging Sideways. Tell us a little bit about how you came up with that.
Okay, and uh, and the cover is deliberate too. I've made the title be on a slant, and I'll explain why. Um, the title of the book came from an idea that I got from a book by an art teacher named Betty Edwards. In 1987, she published a book called "Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain," and people may be familiar with that book. I highly recommend it. It's a really interesting book. She gave her art students many different exercises, but one of which was called upside down drawing. And what she did was she had her gave her students a photograph of an object, let's say a chair, and asked them to draw the chair. So they did. They did it to the best of their ability. But she found that when she turned the photograph upside down and she asked her students to copy exactly what they saw, then what happened to the students' brains was it puts their left hemisphere, judgmental part of their brain, the one that has all these preconceived notions of what chairness is all about, it kind of put that to sleep. And the right side of the brain took over, and all they were seeing were the lines and the spaces between the lines. And then when they finished doing that drawing, when they turned their drawings right side up, that chair was far more accurate than the chair that they drew when they were looking at the chair right side up. So I thought, well, that to me is a lot like how we see aging. We get aging wrong. We're viewing it with the wrong kind of perspective. We have blinders on, and we only see it as a process of deterioration and decline. And so everybody dreads it. We're all fearful of getting older, you know. So I decided, well, what if I kind of, and I've been doing this with my blog posts, I find quirky ways of explaining aging, surprising, weird kind of ways that are true, that are accurate. And I said, what if we all start looking at aging in a different way? I don't expect people to turn their brains entirely upside down, but maybe just kind of cock them to the side and say, you know, I don't think what I'm thinking about or what I'm hearing about aging, that doesn't sound right to me. So that's how I got the title of the book.
I love it, and I can already tell that this is going to be a great discussion. And I want to remind our audience, especially those that may have never been to one of these, uh, please use chat and Q&A to share your thoughts and questions or ideas. Uh, that's one of the coolest things about these discussions is getting feedback, and so feel free to do that. Now, before we dive into the chapter, I'd love to kind of know what some of your big picture ideas are. Like, what are some of the common myths about aging that you look to dispel with this book, your work in general?
Sure. And there are so many myths, so I'm going to narrow them down to a few. But the first one is that aging is a disease. You know, like I said, it's nothing but deterioration and decline. That's a big myth. Aging is not a disease. I'll say it again. Aging is not a disease. We're supposed to do it. If you're alive right now, you're doing something right. Okay? So, what's the alternative to this disease? So it's not a disease. Now, granted, as we get older, we can be susceptible to certain types of age-related diseases like dementia, heart disease, cancer, diabetes. But aging itself, the way we know aging is not a disease, if it was, from the moment we were born, we get sicker and sicker and sicker until we died. And we don't
Oh,
do that.
wow.
And people can actually recover from illnesses that they've had when they were children. So that to me is proof that aging is not a disease.
I
So
love it.
that's one of the myths.
Okay.
Um, Talking about dementia, one big myth is if we live long enough, we're going to get dementia. That's like inevitable. Totally not true. In fact, there's some really good news about dementia. Um, People over the age of 65, only 1 in 10 have some form of dementia. Now, let me explain. Dementia is think of it as a syndrome. Think of it as a collection of symptoms. Like you would think of a headache or a stomach ache. You know, you can have a headache for a number of reasons. You could have a brain tumor. You could have been hit on the head. You could have sinus problems. There are many reasons why you could have that symptom. Well, there are many reasons why you can develop dementia. But only 1 in 10 people over the age of 65 have it, and only 1 out of 3 people over the age of 90 have it, which means 2/3 of people over the age of 90, their brains work perfectly fine. And what I mean by perfectly fine, I'm not counting the what did I open this closet door for? We all have that. We all get that. And by the way, those moments start when we're in our 20s. So it's not just an old person's experience. Why did I open the closet door? Where did I put my car keys? Okay. So that's another big one. And 40% of different dementias can be actually controlled or prevented by lifestyle changes. Getting enough sleep, don't abuse alcohol, don't smoke, do various kinds of things that keep your brains healthy. Another big myth is old people can't change. We're stuck in our ways. By the way, I'm an old person. I'm 72. I proudly declare my age. We should not just admit our age, we should be declaring our age, whatever that age is. We've earned every single year we've been alive. Um, but you know, we people like me can't change. We're stuck in our ways. Totally not true. I'll tell you, if you don't consider yourself an older adult yet, keep in mind that as you get older, you're going to be dealing with more and more change. The older you get, our bodies change. One of the biggest changes that get as we get older is we begin to lose people our own age. Our cohorts start to die off. Our partners, our spouses, our best friends. And we're dealing with that change all the time. We have been changing all our lives. The way I like to put it is I ask people, what was a telephone like when you were a kid? What's a telephone like now? You've gone through every iteration of a phone, all the iterations of cars and washing machines and all of that. So we constantly change. So that's a big myth that needs to be thrown out the window. And finally, another myth is old people, we can't learn new things. Our brains are such that we just can't learn new things past a certain point. Well, according to a 2022 Pew study, um, 96% of 18 to 29-year-olds have a smartphone. 83% of 50 to 64-year-olds have a smartphone. 61% of people 65 and older have a smartphone. By the way, anytime you hear a study that breaks people up into groups and the last group is 65 plus, take that with not just a grain of salt, but a bucket of salt. We should not be, 65-year-olds should not be lumped together with people in their hundreds. And by the way, there's a good chance you might be living to 100. So, so when that kind of breakdown is false. So 61% of 65 plus, well, if they broke it down into smaller pieces, you'd have a greater proportion of the younger cohort. So that's just a smartphone. We're on the internet all the time. We're on social media. We're texting people. So that's a big myth. So all of these are just crazy, crazy myths that just need to go away.
Man, I love it, and so much to unpack there. But one of the things that I love doing with authors is taking a look inside of your book and having a little discussion around it. And so what I did was I put together a little slide there of your book and the chapters. And why don't we dive in and kind of go through some of these and share with us some of the insights. But first, um, give us a little in putting together this book, is there sort of a sequence in the design of the way these 11 chapters are put together?
Yeah, sure. I started with the chapter about stories because, and my book is dedicated to both my parents and to my maternal grandmother, who was a great influence on my life. Um, she was my first really, truly great role model of what it means to be an old person. She was an immigrant, hardly spoke any English. She was Italian, but we got along famously. And old people, as I grew up, old people were never invisible to me. They were never scary to me. It's because I had that wonderful relationship with her. Here's a little interesting side note. I'm a gerontologist, and when I went back to graduate school in my 50s, I went back to graduate school. I was in classes with people who had just graduated college in their 20s. And so they learned from me and I learned from them. But I was fascinated by why would 20-year-olds want to study aging? And I would ask them, why are you doing this? Invariably, without exception, they would always tell me, well, I had a great relationship with a grandparent, or there was this terrific older next door neighbor, or I had a professor, an old professor that I really loved. Exposing children to old people at a young age can really be so effective, and having positive relationships can be so effective in busting ageism. By the way, children as young as 3 years old can start to absorb ageist views by listening to their parents, by looking at the ads on TV, the fairy tales of the Wicked Witch and the Evil King. There's so many messages that children learn, that being old is scary. So
Well,
so
you know,
that's kind of
as you just said that, I was an interesting thing. Some people on the discussion may know that, like, when I'm 59 now, but when I was 43, I moved in and I lived in 5 different retirement communities.
mm,
And one of the moves that I did, I moved in with my 6-year-old son, who
uh-huh.
happens to be, an adult now. But the interesting thing is, when I shot a video of him, but before, when, hey, how do you like the idea of coming to a retirement community with dad? And what do you think a retirement community is? And but what you realized was he had no real age bias, because everybody is older than him. And
Hmm.
but what was interesting, every time we would get into the elevator, the residents of the community would come in and they'd be like, how you holding up with us old people? Like, what was interesting is, oftentimes we as older adults, and we're all older and younger than everybody. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
but we often inflict that bias on the
Yes.
younger generation without even knowing it.
Yes, yes. Older adults, we can be the most ageist people of all. And here's the reason why. We've had decades of having these messages poured into our brains. You know, you can't do this at your age. It's not proper. What, you really, do you think you really want to go back to school at your age kind of thing? The commercials of I've fallen and I can't get up, those kind of things. We have had decades of listening to those kinds of messages. So we can sometimes be the most ageist of all. And that's where ageism needs to start to be turned around, is within everyone's own brains. What's between our ears? How do you think about aging? How you think about aging is going to then direct how you act toward other people in terms of aging, how you act toward older people and younger people. And ageism can go both ways. We can be ageist against young people. Oh, they're too entitled. They're always looking at their smartphones, and there are myths about young people too. We're all individuals, and that's what a lot of what I talk about is about. Let's see each other as individuals and get rid of the categorizations that are really not accurate at all.
Yeah, no, this is great. Okay, so yeah, definitely the stories that we can tell and the examples that we can present can and any opportunity we have to connect the generations and not be age segregated, I think
Right.
is a great opportunity. The title of chapter two is what's age got to do with it, and I think we've probably already danced in a little bit of that, but
Hmm.
any in other insights that you'd want to
Well,
share
the,
on
well,
that?
the, ans- the answer I come to at the end of that chapter is what's age got to do with it? The answer is nothing and everything. Okay? Nothing. If we're judging people solely on their chronological age, then age has nothing to do with it. Let's stop doing that. Everything in terms of let's understand the kinds of ways our brains change, the gifts that we can develop, the skills that we can develop all throughout our lives. So it depends how you look at it. Aging is on a spectrum. It's aging is fluid. You don't just all of a sudden be an old person. You're all of a sudden not a kid anymore. We gradually move from stage to stage. So the short answer is, what's age got to do with it? Nothing and everything, just depending how you look at it.
All right, man, I love that. And chapter three, seeing with fresh eyes. Uh,
Mm.
Share some insights there.
Sure. Well, that's the whole, going back to the Betty Edwards turning the drawing upside down, turning the photo upside down. People have told me that they find my explanations about aging kind of quirky and surprising. And I love doing that. I love taking an issue that we have about aging and seeing it in a strange way. So I'll give you a quick example. The phrase over the hill, okay? These over the hill birthday cards, which thank goodness there are people now creating very age positive cards, which is a great thing. But over the hill, where do we get that notion that at a certain point it's all downhill from there? You climb up through middle age, and at some point everything is going to just get worse. First of all, it doesn't get worse. There's something called the U curve of happiness, in which people tend to be happiest at the beginning of their lives and the ends of their lives, and we have this dip in the middle when we're like in our late 40s. That's when it gets to be the hardest for us. But in terms of over the hill, I say, all right, here's how I look at it. Here's my quirky sideways look at over the hill. What does it take to climb a hill? What do you need? You need strength, you need endurance, you need curiosity, you need the drive to do it, you need good equipment. You might need the expertise of someone else who's climbed the hill before you. This is the pathway to take and all of that. So it takes skill. When nobody, in my opinion, nobody is ever over the hill. What we are, even as old people, is we're at the top of a particular hill. And when we're at the top of that hill, what we get to see in the distance are other hills yet to climb that we didn't even know existed before we climbed the hill. We couldn't see it from the bottom of the hill we just climbed. So we're constantly climbing hills as we get older. You get to the top and you see another challenge left ahead of you. So that's how I look at over the hill. And that's just an example of seeing something with fresh eyes. Take something that is mundane and everyday and people take for granted and say, no, I don't think we're looking at it the right way.
You know, and I hope I'm not jumping the gun here, but one of the things that I find one of the ways that I'm able to better focus the topic of ageism with fresh eyes is I always compare ageism to sexism or racism. And as you had talked about the birthday cards, the horrible, disparaging birthday cards. Imagine if somebody handed you a card in the same spirit of teasing you about being old, teasing you about being a woman or a
Right,
particular race that you were.
right,
And but somehow we've made it acceptable to make jokes about some how long somebody has lived on this planet.
right. Well, and you bring up a really good point. Ageism is the only prejudice we are all vulnerable to because we're all aging. Not
Hmm.
all of us are vulnerable to racism or sexism or homophobia or ableism,
Wow.
whatever, but we're all getting older. So if we don't deal with ageism now, our kids, our grandkids, our great grandkids are going to be dealing with it. So let's end it now. And I'm glad you posted age-friendly vibes in the chat. The Jan Golden, who owns that business, does great, very positive aging cards, very very supportive aging cards. Those are the kind of cards to send to people. Forget the black balloon thing, and all of that. Um, so yeah, you're right. Yeah, ageism, we're all vulnerable to it,
Yeah.
and that because we're all vulnerable to it, it's everywhere around us, and we try to separate ourselves from them. It's the us versus them. We laugh at an ageist joke because it's our way of staying distanced from getting old. Oh, I'm not there yet. I'm not, that's them, that's not us. Well, guess what? All of the us's are going to be the thems at some point. So
Yeah.
we need to
No.
be dealing with it
It
that way.
really is bizarre,
Yeah.
and but it's anyways, okay. Let's see. Chapter 4 is titled Aging on Our Minds.
Mm. Okay, aging on our minds. Yeah, because that really is on our minds. When we think of getting older, I don't think many of us usually think about we do think about getting particular diseases, cancer or heart disease or whatever, but that's the number one concern of people getting older is being afraid in terms of health, is being afraid of getting dementia. And as I said, there's a good chance that you might not get dementia, but there are things about our minds that people don't know about that I love talking about, and that is how our brains change with time and the skills that young brains have, what young brains are really good at, and then there are things that old brains are really good at. And so I like talking about those. So I'll just give you a very quick overview. Young brains are really good at speed of processing. They can react really fast. Oh yeah, this and that. They can take in information, new information, and work with it very easily. Um, they can multitask, which means shifting back and forth very quickly between two conscious tasks. By the way, our brains are not meant to do two conscious things simultaneously. It is impossible for our brain to do two conscious things simultaneously. So we shift back and forth in nanoseconds, and younger people's brains are able to do that. They're also very good at a concept of a conceptual creativity, a type of creativity called conceptual creativity. That's the kind of out of the box, where did I get this idea from kind of thinking. They're very good at that. So those are the things that young brains are good at. Here are the things that older brains are good at. We're very good at information discrimination. We know better and through our experience and years of living, what piece of information is important and what is irrelevant when you do a task. Through our lives, we've created shortcuts. So we can tell somebody, oh, you don't need to go through A, B, C, and D. You can go from right A to D just by doing this shortcut. So we're good at coming up with those kinds of knowing what's important and what's not. We're very good at multi-perspective problem solving. As we get older, our brains become more and more able to use both hemispheres simultaneously better. Now, that's not to say that young people don't use both hemispheres of their brains simultaneously. Of course they do, but they get better at it the older they get. So what that means is we problem solve from different perspectives. We can tap into and empathize with people who maybe years ago we wouldn't have been able to find anything in common with, or be able to understand where they're coming from. We get better at that the older we get. We also get better at what's called soft skills, and I'm not crazy about the term soft. I call them power skills, but they're social skills, like how to mediate, how to work with people and deal with different types of personalities. We get better at that the older we get. We also have a kind of creativity that's not conceptual, although we can retain our conceptual creativity from being younger. You know, old brains don't have to give up young brain skills in order to get the older brain skills. Plenty of us older people can still think out of the box and do these wild creative ideas. But we have a type of creativity called experimental creativity. We can take any idea and revise it, readjust it, redesign it, and reapply it in a different way. So that's why you really need young brains and old brains together in the workplace. They are the most productive because the young brains can come up with these wild, wacky ideas, and the older brain can say, that's a good idea, but you know what? We may have to watch out for this possibility happening. So let's be on our guard about that. Old brains are really good at quality control. And that's why you need both brains in the workplace. And there's plenty of research that shows that productivity goes up and businesses actually expand when you keep older adults in the workplace with the younger people.
I love
So,
it.
oh, and I just want to explain one more quick thing. In terms of not reacting fast enough as we get older, we lose that kind of speed of processing. There's a reason why our brains slow down when it comes to getting information, retrieving information. Think of our brains as libraries. Everything you've experienced, let's say, is a library in your head. All your knowledge and all your experiences. Let's say you have a 35-year-old healthy brain, and you ask that 35-year-old brain to go into that library and find the book Huckleberry Finn. Go find me Huckleberry Finn. Well, the 35-year-old brain's going to go right to the shelf, pull down the book. Here's the book. You get a healthy 75-year-old brain, and you say, go find me Huckleberry Finn. But that 75-year-old's brain isn't 100,000 books full, it's 100 million books full. So you've got the library has built a couple of floors since all throughout the decades, and the aisles have gotten longer, and the shelves there are more shelves. So it's going to take a while. Gee, I think it's in the other room. No, it's in a box in the basement. Give me a few minutes. Here are two advantages to the older brain. One is the longer you live, chances are you may have come across reading Huckleberry Finn. Chances are more likely. And the second thing is, with our ability to see from different perspectives, we can say, and if you like Huckleberry Finn, I got five other books I can recommend that you're going to enjoy. So
Hmm.
those are some of the assets of the older brain. And these are things people don't really know about. And I'd like to be able to dispel our fears about getting older because there's some really good stuff about getting older.
I love it. All right. Now, I'm not sure if we're going to discuss this in any of the chapters, but I love this question that came in. What about temporal dissidence, which I actually had to look up? It's the concept that describes misalignment or conflict between different perceptions or experiences in time. And they say, I'm 55 years old, but I feel like I'm only in my mid 40s. How does that impact aging? Uh, you hear people saying this a lot. Is
Mm.
that I feel like I'm 20. Like what kind of insights can you offer us there?
That's an interesting situation. It's an interesting, the writer Anne Lamott says we are all the ages we have ever been. You don't lose being a child in a way. You don't lose being a teenager. You could still remember back to those days, or in some ways act as if you were a teenager again. Aging is a cumulative experience. So this temporal dissonance also may be affected by our prejudice about, well, what is a 65-year-old or a 55-year-old supposed to feel like? Well, if we have a certain concept of what 55-ness is, and we don't feel that we fit that concept, we feel like we're 30, then there's that dissonance. But what if 55 is the new 55? I don't like phrases that say 60 is the new 40. 60
Yeah,
is the new 60. You know, you are what you are. Um, and I don't like the phrase that says, I'm 72 years young. No, I'm 72 years old. I
yeah,
have
yeah.
earned that. When you say 72 years young, that implies that still being young is better than being old. So I guess and maybe I'm not really answering your question well
Oh
about
no,
temporal
no. I
dissonance,
think
but
I think that's one of the things that I like about talking about ageism is that it's more thought-provoking statements like yeah, what does an age feel like? I mean, and
mhm.
it feels like an age does not feel like anything, and I think good for you if you sort of uh, are healthy enough that you're not fitting the perception of what you were going to be like. Because I think actually when we get right down to this is that we all probably had this future vision of
Right,
ourselves, like when we were 20 years old, this is what I'm going to be like when I'm
right,
55. And then
right,
you get there and you feel more like you did when you were 20. Well,
right.
hey, give yourself a pat on the back. That means you're probably living a good life and living a healthy life. And that's good. Okay.
And
Um,
50 and 55 is the new 55.
yeah,
What you
yeah,
feel like now is what 55 feels like to you, you know?
yep,
So yeah, I think
it
that
does.
whole idea of temporal dissonance is kind of intriguing, but that's how I would explain it anyway.
Yep. All right. Let's see here. We're on to chapter 5, a life of one's own.
A life of one's own. I think what keeps us older adults from wanting to live the lives we want to live in the ways we want to live it. And the big thing that keeps us from doing that is ageism. That's what's in our way. Um, Not seeing us as individuals, but as stereotypes, categorizing us, um, pitting us against other generations. What a waste of energy, what a waste of time, and what an unjust thing to do, to make us. And by the way, there are companies that really make millions and trillions of dollars off of keeping us um, afraid of getting older. And I think of the anti-aging
Well,
industry, the beauty
yeah,
industry, the Botox, the hair dye. And by the way, it's getting younger and younger. I mean, there are men in their 30s in Silicon Valley who are getting hair plugs and Botox injections. And the worst of all is there, I don't know if you've ever heard this new phenomenon of called Sephora kids, where they're young girls and they're 11, 12 years old, haunting these beauty shops for anti-aging creams. 11 years old. What are we doing to these kids? My favorite old-time actress, Ingrid Bergman, used to say, at 40, you get the face you deserve. And she meant that in a good way. At 40, you start to see the person that you are meant to be, all your experiences. I had a friend whose grandson said to me, "You have some wrinkles. How did you get your wrinkles?" And so I said, "Yeah, I do have wrinkles. You know how I got my wrinkles? I've smiled a lot, and I've cried a lot, and I've thought a lot. That's how I got my wrinkles. And someday, when you live long enough, you'll get wrinkles like this too. And that shows that you've really been living a good life."
you
So,
know, I'm glad you brought up the smile because oftentimes when I'm talking about the anti-aging, like plastic surgery, dyeing our hair, the true the true sign of beauty is a smile. And
mm,
no matter how many wrinkles or what you look like, it's a smile. And that is oftentimes it can oftentimes be difficult because having a smile on our face is, finding a sense of purpose. And
mm,
perhaps you've had loss or healthcare or what have you, but there's so many people out there that are out there to help us put that smile and find that sense of purpose.
mhm,
But
mhm.
yeah, that the whole term anti-aging, I mean, anti-aging means death. Like
Yes,
if you're not
right,
aging, you're dead. And we're
right,
going to smear cream all over our
right.
our face that is essentially death cream. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we might as well be Egyptian mummies and be, entombed and just, preserved. But yeah, right, exactly.
All right.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Okay. We're burning through these chapters. Okay, chapter 6, here, there, and everywhere.
Once you become aware of ageism, you then start to see it everywhere because it is everywhere. Okay. There are different levels of ageism. We've talked about internalized ageism. That's, when we think ageist thoughts about ourselves, we can't do things, we're too old, all of that stuff. Then think of it like a target with a bullseye. The bullseye is the individual, is you, and how you think about aging. So that's that internalized ageism is right in the center. Then the next ring out from that is relational ageism. When people tell you an ageist joke or make a comment about you, you sure you want to be driving there, or do you think you can handle whatever? That's relational ageism between person to person, or when somebody, a care attendant who's not enlightened about aging might say, honey, sweetie, how are you today? And, infantilizing, that's relational ageism. Then the next ring out is institutional ageism, where the institution is ageist against people. That's when older adults are denied places on clinical trials for a new drug because they don't fit the parameters of the drug that they're studying. So as a result, how are we going to know what the dosage is if we want to give it to an old person? Old people's bodies are not middle-aged bodies, just like middle-aged bodies are not children's bodies. That's why we have pediatricians and we also have geriatricians because our bodies work differently as in both ends of the spectrum. So that's institutional ageism. Also institutional ageism at work, in the workplace. Hurry up and retire, get out of the way. Or I don't want to hire a 20-year-old who's going to then just up and leave, or I don't want to hire a 60-year-old who's going to up and leave. That's institutional ageism. And then finally, there's cultural ageism, and it's all the media stuff and calling somebody a granny in a headline when the article about this woman has nothing to do with the fact that she's a grandmother, but the fact that she's old. Those are the cultural messages. So that's what here, there, and everywhere. If once you become aware of ageism, you get to see it everywhere. And that can be a good thing because then we know how to counteract it everywhere we are. Don't let an ageist comment go by, just like you might not let a racist or a sexist comment go by. If somebody says something ageist, you can kindly, politely say, that doesn't really apply to all the old people I know, or that could be kind of hurtful. There's a way in which we should be speaking up for these things. So,
Man, this is great. Okay, let's see. Well, we all learned a lot from the pandemic, but
mm.
what did we learn from the aging sideways viewpoint?
Older people 65 and older are 16% of our population, and we have suffered 90% of the COVID deaths. Now, if we were a really just society, those two digits wouldn't be so far apart. A lot of times during COVID, people in nursing homes got the brunt of the lack of resources being sent into nursing homes. People got triaged in hospitals um, in some ways based on their age. Well, he's 85. He's not going to live much longer. We should be doing this to the 20-year-old, as opposed to taking people as individuals. Maybe the 85-year-old was in good enough shape to run a marathon, but suddenly got very sick. Maybe the 20-year-old um, has multiple problems. Are we judging people just solely on their age, or are we judging them on their capacity to recover from the illness? So we've learned some things, the medical community has learned some things about triaging and how to take age as a very minor factor in the decision making and looking at other things instead. So that's what I would say about the pandemic.
Okay, great. Okay, now chapter 8, sending the right messages. This is the topic that I like, and actually, just having you on and going through this is just getting the word out there. But what are
Yeah.
some thoughts from that chapter?
Again, people of any age are individuals and we're complex individuals. So we shouldn't be categorized and assumptions shouldn't be made of us. Get to know us no matter what our age is. First and foremost, aging is natural, okay? None of us ages alone. We are all interdependent. When people think of older people as being needy, at what stage of your life have you never needed anything? All right. Children need things. Young people need things. Middle-aged people need things. We all need things. So we are all interdependent. And the ways in which we're not totally independent. And when they talk about independent living, you're in an independent living community. Well, you're getting your meals there. You're getting services provided for you. You're not totally independent either. We're all interdependent. So that's another message. Um, at every life stage, there are gains and losses and challenges at every life stage. So being older doesn't necessarily mean that we only experience losses. Being a child doesn't mean you only experience gains. Um, Learning doesn't stop when we're old, and neither does productivity. It's just a different type of productivity. We may not be as productive as we were in middle age in the same ways, but we're productive in other ways. And there's some really great models for us of ways in which we can be productive as we get older. We can mentor, we can serve on committees, we can do volunteer work, we can do all kinds of things that are productive in the ways that we want to be productive. And many of us older adults are still productive in the workplace, and we still want to be there. We're not done yet, and we're not burned out. So those are some of the right messages. And by the way, we got to get rid of these when you see an article in a paper talking about an older adult or something, and the photograph that goes with it is just a photo of wrinkly hands. Is that a way to portray older people as just a photo of wrinkly hands? Or the ads on TV that portray us as comical and clueless and clumsy and needy. Those are the messages that we have to change. So we need to send the right messages.
All right, great. Okay. Talking about our generations, one of my favorite Who songs, but what are you talking about there?
Um, Well, there are problems with naming generations. I personally am getting away from the idea of, calling myself a baby boomer. All right, big deal. I was born somewhere between 1946 and 1964. I was born in 1952. I'm a baby boomer. But what does that mean? Well, when people think of baby boomers as greedy geezers, well, I've never been wealthy. I'm not a greedy geezer. I'm not hoarding cash. When people talk about millennials, that they're entitled, I know lots of millennials who are just so active in society and want to improve society. So these generational labels don't really hold. The only thing I think that's valid to say about a generation is here's a group of people who experienced similar social events at the same time, at the same stage of their lives. That's it. But how we experience them can be so different. I'm growing up as an older white woman, but I don't know what it's like to grow older as a black man or a gay, a gay person who's in a wheelchair or whatever. We have all of these intersectional other factors that mitigate how we age. So talking about generations is not an accurate thing really to do, and we need to be getting away from that. The way I like to see it is I describe it, and here's my sideways approach. I see it as all of us, all of our ages, we are a bunch of trees growing in the forest. Some of us as trees have skinny trunks, others have wide trunks. Some of us have roots go deep into the ground. Others, our roots are shallow. We're at different stages. Some of us are seedlings and saplings. Others have been around for hundreds of years. We're all experiencing the climate and the conditions at the same time, but at different stages of our lives and in different ways. That's the best way I could describe generations.
Got it. And yeah, I think anytime we lump somebody associated with an age together, whether it be teenagers or older adults, it's ripe for problems. Okay.
Yeah.
Chapter 10, Growing Older Your Way. And yeah, I like this.
Growing old. So if we can have our druthers and if we could be growing the ways we want to grow, here are some strategies that I offer. First of all, as I said before, examine your own reactions to aging, including any ageist views you may have. So get that straight in your own head, and that's a good way to start aging your own way. Um, Step out and engage others by sharing your story, your time, and your talents. A lot of times, older adults think, and rightfully so sometimes, people don't want to hear us. They don't want to listen to what we have to say. I have met so many young people who really want to hear the stories of old people. How did you do it? What is it like? What are you going through? What advice do you have for me? So share your story, your time, and your talents. I guarantee you there's something you know that somebody else would like to learn. Find out who that person is and teach it to them, and then learn from them what they've got that they could teach you. Um, know your value and potential to make a difference and communicate them to others. A lot of times we older people, when we're going in for job interviews, we kind of go in with this, oh my gosh, will they hire me? Will they think I'm too old? We should be going in self-advocating, saying, with my brain skills that I've now mentioned to you what we've got. You need me in this company. You really need me. This is what I can contribute to your company. So know your value, know what you've got going on, and how you can share those with others. Start declaring your age. As I said before, everybody should be declaring their age. Be open to surprise and to surprising others. You know, a lot of people, sometimes old people will say, I'm afraid to go to this party. What if I'm the only old person there? If you're the only person there, great. You could be the role model. Go up and talk to some young people and find out what they're about. And they'll find out what you're about. So be open to surprise, and they may be surprised by you. Hey, look at this old person who's, she's kind of cool. Maybe I'm thinking a little bit wrong about what old people are like. Demand that society reality checks its expectations of you. Like I said, don't expect that we're going to be pathetic and needy. You know, they should be considering us as complex human beings. Um, Openly question any situation that makes aging an issue. If you're at a meeting and there are only old people there, but it has nothing to do with age, ask why aren't there more young people? Just as we would do the same if we were at a meeting and there were no people of color, or there were no or no white people. If you're at a meeting where there are mostly people of color, or all men or all women, and it has nothing to do with gender. If you're at a public city council meeting and you're looking around and you don't see people being represented, um, you know, accurately in terms of reflection of society, ask, raise it, and especially when it comes to age. Actively enlist and involve allies. There are plenty of younger people who want to be and are our allies. Don't be afraid to engage with them and say, how can you and I together help solve this ageist problem that not only I suffer from, but you suffer from? What can we do together? And then finally, take the initiative to challenge ageism whenever you encounter it. Don't let an ageist comment go by. And there are many ways of doing it gently and a sense of humor. I've done it when I'm at the supermarket cashier counter, and the cashier, who's decades younger than me, says, "Did you find everything you needed today, young lady?" And I'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have eye problems? I'm an old person, and I'm okay with that, and you could be okay with it too." And that
Yeah.
usually brings a smile, and it's like, "Oh, okay." So there are ways of calling it out. So those would be some strategies for growing older our own way.
I love it. Jan Golden, the age-friendly vibes card maker, she says
Hmm.
when somebody gives you one of these age disparaging cards, that's a great opportunity to have a polite conversation about what everybody in the room thinks about growing old
Yep.
without being rude about it. Now, Ruth has a good question comment here. She said, in September, I attended my 50th high school reunion, and afterwards, I decided I was done dyeing my hair. I grew up with red hair and it's growing in pure white. It's amazing the reactions I'm getting. I'm proud of my age, and she's 68 right now. Um, Ruth, hair color is one of those things that even amongst aging advocates, I've been told is sort of like one of these interesting topics. But Ruth, a great story that I can share similar to yours was I was on a panel once with a couple of gerontologists, and the I shared the Dove cosmetics ad that says gray gorgeous, and it's this woman with a big smile on her face and just flowing gray hair. And the last panel member was this gerontologist, and she said, I've been trying to set a good example for my daughter on, being growing up and what have you. And she watches me the expert gerontologist, she watches me dye my hair and complain about the gray hair that I'm getting. She said, that image just made me think that what kind of message am I sending to my own daughter versus what I'm talking about here up on the podium. So
And that, well, the thing is too that, and I understand when people dye their hair if they're looking for a job and they're afraid that they're going to be judged because they're too old and everything. What we do when we dye our hair is we're treating the symptom, but we're not treating the cause. If we could get rid of the cause of ageism, nobody would have to dye their hair, nobody would have to get Botox. So that's where this movement, this pro-aging movement, is all about. Let's start chipping away at the actual cause, so we don't have to worry about all of these adjustments and accommodations we make to not look old.
Yep. Now, and that gets us to the last chapter, which is empowering aging. And I'm looking at the time, and holy cow, we burned through an hour here. But share with us some thoughts there, and what are you've really inspired me to think differently about to start thinking sideways a little bit. That in,
Well, thank you. Well, I titled it Empowering Aging because if people have ever heard the phrase successful aging, if you Google successful aging, you get millions of hits. And the overwhelming number of times it's about um, doing all the things we need to do to age well, take care of our bodies and the routine, eat right and exercise and socialize and all of that. Okay. But that implies that the responsibility for getting older is solely on us. We are totally responsible. But what if, we know we're supposed to eat right, but what if you live in a place, in an area of town that's considered a food desert? You don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. What if you are a person of color and you've experienced prejudice all throughout your life in terms of trying to get a job or decent housing or an education, whatever? So what I say is it's not right to consider, and by successful aging, it implies you could fail at aging. Okay,
yeah.
and the failure is yours if you fail. I say let's consider empowered aging because 50% of the responsibility, yeah, is on us, but the other 50% is on society. We've got to change our social structures to support people of all age friendly cities, make transportation accessible, make all kinds of things accessible to people of all abilities and all ages. So half the job is on us and half the job is on society. And when they work together, that's empowered aging. So that's what I mean by that.
I love it. Man, Jeanette, our this has been amazing. You have really researched and thought about this so deeply, which is very evident in your book and your thoughts.
Well,
Are
thank
there
you.
is there anything that we haven't really covered today that you want to make sure that our community knows about?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure. We probably have covered a lot, but I know we've covered a lot. But um, we need to advocate for ourselves, and we need to advocate for others. That's the best thing I can do. Get in the game. Get in the game. Don't just be don't just experience um, ageism for at whatever age you are. Get in the game and say, all right, this is a line I will not beyond which I will not tolerate. And let's do all the things we need to do just to make the society better for everyone because we're all getting older. Our planet is getting older, and kids need to be freed of the burden of ageism. Let's do it for our posterity too.
Yeah, and I think like earlier in the conversation, we were talking about dementia. We were talking about the things that none of us want to happen to ourselves and our loved ones, but
Right,
it's just it's the luck of the dice. It's none of us have a crystal ball. You could eat healthy, you could do all these things, and you may have a cognitive disorder. You may have an accident. You may need a mobility device that's out
right,
there. One of
right.
the things, and this is sort of ageist, but the one of the things that I noticed over the years is that in senior living communities, which again are age segregated and all older adults, and someday in my lifetime, I hope I begin to see more um, intergenerational living situations where older adults can be supported if they need it.
Hmm.
But one of the things that I would commonly see is you've got the assisted living is on the third floor, and people are sort of, oh, she's on the third floor, or I don't
Right,
want to go to the third floor.
right.
And whenever I will hear somebody saying something like that, I said, it would be really great if you would volunteer and spend as much time as you can getting to know those people on the third floor,
Hmm.
because someday you may be there. And the more that we can get to understand that people in wheelchairs, people with dementia, people with all kinds of disabilities and disorders are people too,
Right.
that can also eliminate some of these age bias issues.
Right, again, right. And people who are afraid to mingle with the third floor people, that's that internalized ageism. That's the kind of, I
Yeah.
don't want to, I'm afraid of becoming like that and I don't want to be there. And so, right, exactly. So, yeah, and also, I mean, societally, we need a national long-term care system in this country because most older adults will not have the income to be able to live in these kinds of places. And we're heading for a real disaster when we don't create something like that right now. And
Oh, yeah.
and 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 right now, a lot of our own supports are being under threat. So we have to stay on the ball.
Yep. No, this is great. Well, this has been an amazing discussion. Folks, the recording will be up at proaging.com. I'll have links to Jeanette's book, how you can get, oh, and before you take off, let me just uh here, I'm gonna make sure that I drop your website into chat, and I want to just spotlight the fact that not only can you get Jeanette's book very easily if you visit her website, but you also do aging wellness presentations, public workshops, and professional development workshops. Um,
Mhm.
are these like, well, here, I'm just going to click on the aging. Are these are generally open to the public, and oh, groups can bring you on board to do these
Right,
workshops.
right. Yeah,
Okay,
they can hire me to give these. I've given them at libraries. I've given them at senior centers and independent living communities. I've talked to businesses. I'd love to talk to businesses because managers need to know you need to keep those older brains in the workplace. So, but yeah, yeah. So I'm available to do those kinds of presentations.
great. All right. Well, this has been a great time together, and I look forward to continuing a dialogue with you. So if you have any new fresh ideas or anything like that, we'd love to have you back here to share
They're
those.
coming all the time, Steve. And thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
I love it. All right.